CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Extremist attacks in northern Burkina Faso kill at least 19. Guinea Bissau's leader sacks his government. Namola app seeks to lower crime through emergency response in South Africa. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. Here are more stories you can expect in the hour. And in your business news, Kenya announces plans to cut commercial borrowing. And in sport, the clock is ticking as the Springboks count down preparations to the Rugby World Cup finals. Well, let's begin in Burkina Faso, where the death toll from the Monday attack in Pobe Mangao has risen to 19. It is also emerging that the attackers also burned down houses and shops before escaping on stolen motorbikes. The 19 people were killed after refusing to cooperate with militants who had demanded their assistance to acquire arms. Authorities are blaming the jihadists from neighboring Mali for the attack. At the same time, the government says that jihadists have been fanning conflicts between herders and farmers in the northern regions. Burkina Faso is one of the countries in the larger Sahel region facing rising militant activity. Meanwhile, we move to Morocco now, which has warned that the terror threats remain high in the country. Despite the death of the ISIL leader, Baghdadi was killed on Sunday in a raid by the U.S. He lured many foreign recruits to wage attacks in Iraq and Syria. In Morocco, many dismantled terrorist cells have sworn allegiance to Baghdadi.
ISIL leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi could be dead, but the ideology of jihad in Morocco runs deep. Just last week, security forces broke up a dangerous terrorist cell with links to ISIL group. The cell leader also pledged his allegiance to Baghdadi.
All year round, we dismantle terrorist cells who have terror projects. So far, we've dismantled 13 cells. The particularity of this one, compared to others, is that the preparations were at a very advanced stage to carry out terrorist acts targeting sensitive sites in the city, but also at sea.
The shock crackdown was carried out in several areas, which include Tamaris, Casablanca, Chefche, Wen, and Wazane.
The terrorist cell, composed of 7 people from the Casablanca region, and had reached a very advanced level in terms of the preparation of terrorist operations, which constitute a real danger to the economy of the Kingdom of Morocco.
Morocco says it is well prepared to counter jihadists returning from the Middle East, where many militants have set base. According to the latest statistics released by authorities, some 1,600 Moroccans joined ISIL ranks in Syria and Iraq. More than 700 died, while nearly 300 have been brought to justice. The latest anti-terror operation is part of ongoing efforts to counter threats to the country's security.
The investigation is still ongoing as to determine the identity of the person from ISIL who brought them the weapons through the Sahel along with the money, him and others with him.
Morocco has since reviewed its security and legal framework. Authorities have also increased surveillance of religious groups while cooperating with other states to counter terrorism. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
We move to Egypt now, which is hosting the Munich Security Council core meetings. Heads of intelligence bureaus held a round-table talks with the Egyptian president and other officials. The meetings aim to enrich the annual Munich Security Council and reach a global consensus on fighting common security challenges. Here is Adel Emrouhi with more.
Beside its famous security summit in February, the Munich Security Conference holds a smaller meeting once a year. MSC's core group meeting was held for 2 days in Egypt for the first time. It's an exclusive gathering of defense ministers, heads of intelligence bureaus and global experts.
When a meeting with this unique collection of international security officials come to Cairo, I believe is an indication that to them Egypt is an important axis in the Middle East and Africa. These states care about balancing powers in the region. They know well that Egypt has the power to effect that balance.
Concerned with the deterioration of regional security, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has held a meeting with the core group. The talks tackled the political crisis in Libya, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and issues that concerns the African Union and international security policies. A
gathering on defense ministers would indicate that it's a regular routine meeting. But when heads of intelligence meet, that's a different story. It's a kind of declaration that they are collaborating with Egypt on the intelligence level. The ongoing wars in the world are no longer wars of arms. They are wars of intelligence, information and data.
The meeting was an opportunity for Egypt to call for a collective global cooperation in fighting common threats. Terrorism and illegal migration are topping Europe's concerns. Egypt believes that they are all interlinked with regional conflicts, and that by providing a fair solution to these conflicts, the threats Europe are concerned with will eventually go away. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now head to South Africa, where a crime-fighting app has been launched. Namola, which is a free downloadable app, aims to provide 24-hour emergency assistance for users. Here's more from Jane Keo.
Lesedi Mahlangu is lucky to be alive, all thanks to the Namola app. A few months ago, she fell victim to crime and was held at gunpoint after gangsters invaded her house.
I pressed the emergency button on Namola. They responded, they called really quickly. Even though I had to kind of like whisper, at least they got what happened. So we just kept on texting. And then Namola just sent help. I think even more than two cars of cops came and they helped us, and everything was sorted. The culprit was put behind bars.
Namola is a 24-hour emergency assistance service, which is downloaded by users. When caught up in a situation, users simply press a button on their smart devices, prompting Namola operators to call back immediately.
If we do get an emergency call out, what I love doing is instantly pushing the button to get assistance out, telling Namola, the controller that's on the site, saying, okay, I'm on my way to this scene, I'm going to need this and that, I'm a few minutes away, can you please start already for me? So you can already mentally prepare yourself for that scene and know that you don't have to stress about calling an ambulance, calling police. You know that you can handle the scene that you are in without having that stress behind you.
South Africa tops with crime rates on the continent. Up to 2 million crime incidents have already been reported in 2019 alone. Yet the year is not over. In these cases, emergency response has been singled out as one of the biggest hurdles in tackling crime.
Historically, getting emergency response in South Africa has been quite a challenge for various reasons. And, Namola, we thought, how do we create something that's super simple for all South Africans to be able to push a single button and get immediate response as fast as possible? How do we get help fast to every South African as fast as we can? And this is when we came up with the idea of the app.
With Namola, users can not only access security agencies, but also fire departments and ambulance services. So far, more than 350,000 users have signed up to the Namola app. The number is expected to rise as the service's efficiency continues to be realized. Apart from the virtual emergency services, Namola also offers physical panic button that is installed at a monthly fee of around $5. Jane Keo, CGTN.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, our top story for the hour was from Burkina Faso, with that death toll rising in that attack from Pobe Mangao, which has risen to 19 now. To get more on that story, we're now joined by CGTN's Deji Badmos, who is live for us in Lagos. Deji, thank you so much for joining us. Just to recap from that story, local reports telling us that suspected jihadists had killed at least 19 people in attacks in northern Burkina Faso. What more can you tell us, Deji?
Well, Hannah, what we know is that, this suspected jihadist actually went to a village, of course, in northern Burkina Faso, of course, Mengao now. And basically what we're gathering is that they asked the villagers, they threatened that they were going to take children from the village and then asked the villagers to help them buy weapons, and that the villagers refused. And so they opened fire and eventually killing 16 persons, and now we understand the number has actually gone up. It's and this attack is coming just about 2 weeks after a similar attack in another place in northern Burkina Faso. That was 2 weeks ago, when suspected jihadists also stormed a mosque in northern Burkina Faso, this time in Kudaland province, and opened fire, killing 13 persons on the spot. Eventually 3 more died, bringing the total number of deaths there to 16. And earlier this month also, there was another attack where 12 persons were killed. So we're having a frequency of these attacks. The frequency is actually going up, and it's quite worrying, but then not surprising, because we all know that these suspected jihadists actually cross from Mali, where they are based, into Burkina Faso, and most of the attacks, as we've seen, actually happen in the northern region, especially the border areas now between Burkina Faso and Mali. Hannah?
I'm going to ask you more about that increase in a moment, Deji. For now, what I do want to ask you is the big news that we've had coming out of the weekend when it comes to terror attacks is the ISIL leader having been killed over the weekend. Is there a link between the death of the ISIL leader and the attacks that we've just seen now in Burkina Faso?
Well, Hannah, honestly, it's very, very difficult to tell at this moment. Let's not also forget that apart from ISIL, Al-Qaeda is very active in that region, in the Sahel region especially. As a matter of fact, Al-Qaeda has the upper hand in that region. So we wouldn't know if the suspected jihadists or the jihadists who carried out this attack are linked to ISIL and either actually inspired to carry out the attack as a result of the death of their leader al-Baghdadi. That we would have to find out later. But with the information that is coming through from that region, it appears this was something local and probably has no connection to the death of al-Baghdadi. But we're not absolutely sure. But when you look at some of the statements now coming out from security sources that these guys actually went in there, asked the local people to help them buy weapons, and then the local people refused, and so they decided to open fire on them. So, it's difficult to link it, so to speak. But one thing I must say, Hannah, is that issue is, what exactly is Burkina Faso doing about this? Well, it has deployed, of course, troops to the area, but the fact is that Burkina Faso does not have the capacity to deal with this problem. You have to consider the frequency of these attacks. I mean, we've had like 3 or 4 attacks this month alone, and no arrest has been made. So it's a very tough one for the Burkina Faso military, and that's the reason why leaders in the ECOWAS region actually met in September in the Burkina Faso capital of Ouagadougou, where they took some far-reaching decisions. For instance, they've pledged to commit about $1 billion now to the fight against terrorism in the region, to support the G5 Sahel force that that is beset by problems of funding, training, and lack of equipment. The funding we expect, according to the leaders, would begin to come in as from 2020. So the expectation is that if the funding comes and the G5 Sahel force is able to begin to function properly, then we might begin to see a situation where the region now will begin to take control of the Sahel, because it's a very big issue. The reason why these Islamists are very much in control of that area is just because you have a lot of ungoverned spaces there. And unfortunately, the G5 Sahel force that's supposed to take on these militants has actually not been able to do so, as I said, because of the problem of funding, lack of equipment, and of course training. So that $1 billion pledge now from ECOWAS leaders is very important, and the sooner the funding comes, the better, not just for the Sahel, even for the Sahara as well.
Thank you so much, Deji. We know that you're going to keep a pulse on this for us and continue to give us updates on that story. Deji Badmus joining us live from Lagos in Nigeria. We move on to Guinea Bissau, where the president there, Jose Mario Vaz, has sacked his government with immediate effect. Vaz's decision, which was read out on national radio, is creating doubts over next month's election. The move comes days after Prime Minister Aristide Gomez denounced a coup attempt and police violently repressed an opposition protest. One protester was killed on Saturday and several others were injured during a demonstration calling for a delay to the 24th November election. The opposition wants the election delayed to give it time to clean up the election register to prevent voter fraud. Well, snake bites are a neglected public health issue in many tropical and subtropical countries. Globally, up to 5 million cases of snake bites are recorded each year. Out of that number, 2.5 million cases are life-threatening. This has resulted in over 100,000 cases of death, with many more people ending up with amputated limbs. Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for high cases of deadly snake bites due to poor healthcare services and the lack of anti-venom. According to the latest report by Antivenom Market Research worldwide, the antivenom sector is struggling with high production costs along with inappropriate procurement and medicine distribution. Despite these challenges, though, the report goes on to say that this sector is expected to grow by 4.7% between 2019 and 2020. Well, a group of researchers say they've pinpointed the ancestral homeland of the modern human being in modern-day Botswana. A new study published in the journal Nature reports that scientists analyze mitochondrial DNA, genetic information that gets passed down from the female line from more than 102,000 people across populations in Africa. CGTN's Robin Nagila has more on that story.
It has always been widely accepted that modern humans, Homo sapiens, came from the African continent. What experts have been uncertain about is where in Africa they originated from until now. A new study claims to have the answer and suggests modern humans' ancestral homeland was in modern-day Botswana, just south of the Zambezi River. According to research published in the journal Nature by geneticist Vanessa Hayes of the Govan Institute of Medical Research and University of Sydney, scientists analyzed mitochondrial DNA, genetic information that gets passed down the female line from over 1,200 people across populations in southern Africa. By pulling on that genetic string, researchers say every person alive today descended from a woman who lived in modern-day Botswana about 200,000 years ago. The team's analysis claims that Homo sapiens lived here for about 70,000 years. But as the climate changed, a group spread northeast 130,000 years ago, while a second migration went southwest 110,000 years ago. The timeline, however, contradicts one some scientists have created based on fossil evidence. The oldest ever specimens of anatomically modern humans, skulls and other fossils dating back 195,000 years ago were found in Ethiopia, leading many experts to point to Eastern Africa as the birthplace of our modern ancestors. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
It's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, including UNICEF says child marriages on the decline but still rampant. And labor unions in Algeria hope to raise retirement age to 65 years.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, the latest UNICEF report says child marriages are slightly on the decline, although still rampant in many African and Middle Eastern nations. The report also goes on to blame the situation on failure by governments to implement child protection laws due to religious and cultural beliefs. Let's get more on that story.
Picture this. By the end of this year, about 12 million children will be married before they turn 18. According to the latest UNICEF report, about 18% of these children will be boys and a staggering 82 are girls. In South Africa alone, 6% of girls are married off while still young. This number could be higher because some of these cases go unreported. In general, sub-Saharan Africa is improving in the fight against child marriages, but this does not mean that things are rosy. Niger tops the list in West Africa, with 76% of marriages involving children. It is followed by Central African Republic with 68%, while Mali and Guinea follow with 52% and 51% respectively. The situation is more dire in the north, with Mauritania topping the list, followed by Egypt and Morocco. The depressing part is that in these countries, boys are not spared. The grim situation in these nations is that retrogressive cultures and religion are cited as major catalysts for child marriages. Conflicts and the rise of militancy have also fed into this kind of child abuse. In sub-Saharan Africa, poverty, patriarchal traditions, and the precarious socio-economic position of women have been perpetuating child marriages. But all is not lost. The UNICEF report says the number of child marriages have dropped globally from 34% to 13%. The UN body is, however, calling for more efforts to completely eradicate this practice in the world. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Well, Senegal has begun construction of a multi-million-dollar public transport system aimed at easing congestion in the capital, Dakar. The Dakar Rapid Transit bus will connect the city of Goudiawaye to downtown Dakar in 45 minutes. That's half the initial time. The initiative by the government of Senegal is being funded by the World Bank at around $300 million. The first part of the project will see about 144 buses on an 18-kilometer-long track crossing 23 stations. The buses will ferry around 300,000 passengers daily. The construction phase of the Rapid Transit Bus project will be implemented by the Chinese company CRBC for a period of 30 months. The president of Senegal, Macky Sall, has hailed the project, saying it will transform the country's economy and improve the travel conditions.
This green project, identified as COP21, summit as Senegal's contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, will improve the quality of the air, while also promoting collective transportation instead of private car. I would like, ladies and gentlemen, to tell you that with the Rapid Transit Bus, Dakar will be greener, cleaner, more viable and more attractive. And I know that I can count on the commitment of all actors to support the realization of this project, which will be a determining contribution in the organization of the Youth Olympic Games scheduled for Dakar in 2022.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. We're turning now to Hong Kong, where prominent activist Joshua Wong has been banned from running in the upcoming district council elections. The Hong Kong Electoral Affairs Commission blocked his candidacy, saying he didn't comply with the Special Administrative Region's basic law because he is a leader of a political group advocating Hong Kong independence. Wong had applied to run in the South Horizons West constituency of the Southern District Council. He later confirmed the news on social media. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's chief executive says she's expecting the region to record negative growth this year. Carrie Lam was speaking at her weekly news conference this morning. Our reporter, Gay Yung-Fei, has more.
There are several significant points in Carrie Lam's press conference. First of all, Hong Kong's chief executive warned that it's very likely for Hong Kong's economy to enter a technical recession in 2019, and it would be extremely difficult to achieve an annual growth target of between 0 and 1% this year. Hong Kong's yearly GDP figure could also end in negative growth this year. And the Hong Kong SAR government has poured 20 billion Hong Kong dollars to stimulate the economy. Then this is what she said.
The SAR government will closely monitor the economic downturn of Hong Kong and take necessary measures. Since August, the SAR government has announced relief measures to support enterprises and safeguard jobs each month. On October 22nd, we had just announced the new round of relief measures. The total amount of additional appropriation has exceeded 20 billion Hong Kong dollars.
And she also called for the opposition parties to put aside political differences and work together to revive the economy. Secondly, in response to some rumors saying that the central government in Beijing might move Carrie Lam out of her position, Carrie Lam strongly dismissed Financial Times reports. She said the central government has always supported her administration since the very beginning of the protest, and that support has stayed firm and active now as well as it was 4 months ago.
We move to the UK now, where the driver of the truck that was discovered in Essex with 39 dead bodies inside has appeared in court on charges of manslaughter and human trafficking. 4 others have been arrested for their suspected involvement. CGTN's Richard Bestick reports from Essex.
The investigation surrounding this tragedy continues to focus Britain's attention on not just the human toll, but on the global human trafficking gangs who profit from the lives of the world's vulnerable. Writing in a book of condolence, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the entire world had been shocked by the 39 deaths in the back of a truck in Essex, southeast England. In court, the first to be brought to the court was lorry driver Maurice Robinson from Armagh in Ireland, charged with 39 counts of manslaughter, conspiracy to traffic people, assisting unlawful immigration and money laundering. He was not required to submit a guilty or not guilty plea, and there was no application for bail, so he'll be held in police custody until the case against him is heard at the Old Bailey Central Criminal Court in London, probably in the new year. 4 others have been arrested in connection with the case, 3 of them since released on bail. The other individual being held in Dublin by the Irish police. Essex police say he is a person of interest in the case. According to the Belgian prosecutor's office, he's being questioned about a container truck he was driving in Belgium and any possible links it might have to the vehicle that carried the 39 victims to the port of Zeebrugge for loading to the UK. It's thought likely the Essex police will now apply for an extradition order. In the meantime, British police are saying very few of the victims were carrying official identification documents, and they're working on DNA identification, fingerprints and body markings to help them trace the individuals. Richard Bestick, CGTN, at the Chelmsford Magistrates Court in Essex, southeast England.
We're going to take a short break. When we return, more news, including Kenya announces plans to cut commercial borrowing. And Mario Draghi's era with the European Central Bank comes to an end. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live, your business news. Well, Kenya has announced plans to cut back borrowing on the capital market over the next 3 years. This as the East African economy looks to ease its current debt burden. Kenya debt has risen to 55% of the GDP from a previous 42% since taking office in 2013. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration has been criticized for ramping up borrowing. The Treasury has also announced plans to review its 2019-2020 budget by cutting expenditure. The Finance Ministry says it will focus more on revenue collection by setting realistic tax targets. Most of the loans are channeled to infrastructure projects. The projects fall under the President's Development Program, also known as the Big Four Agenda. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, there's been a steady decrease in the price of cooking gas. With nearly 2.5% price fall, cooking gas is turning out to be a better alternative for more households as well as food businesses. The drop is also increasing demand across the West African economy, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now explains.
Judith Kwesi earns a living from her small cooking business in the Garki market in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. She started out using kerosene stoves, and just months back, she changed to using gas. The crash in the price of cooking gas presents an opportunity for many like Judith to save some extra cash.
That's 6 kg, and married by 2.5.
Before, I used to refill my 6-kilogram cylinder at 2,500 naira. However, now it's being sold at 1,500 naira. There's a huge difference. Now I can save the extra 1,000 naira or use it to buy other ingredients for my business.
I will buy it 1.5, then save that 1,000 naira.
The consumption ratio for cooking gas in the country has continued to rise with a record 600% in the last 2 years. While the price drop may seem insignificant, consumers are excited. The government's earlier removal of the 5% VAT from domestic pricing also contributed to the price fall. Among other advantages, this trend has created a boom in the sector.
Why people are using gas now is that, like when you look at this thing now, you see that
more people are using gas for their cooking now because, as you can see, we have 12.5, 6 and 5 kilogram cylinders respectively. The prices vary from size to size. The different sizes of gas cylinders makes it more economical for people, as they can always buy what their money can afford. My expectation is for the price to drop further so that more people can frequent my business.
But they don't get money for this 12.5. For me, I pray. Made the price go down well so that more customers be coming.
Nigeria currently consumes about 600,000 metric tons, which is over 10% of a country's actual capacity. The goal, however, is to achieve 5 million metric tons utilization in the next 10 years, and that could be achieved with a continuous price drop. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Tunisia's energy balance deficit worsened in 2018 to around $3.2 billion, representing about 32.4% of the country's trade deficit. Experts warn that this situation can affect the balance of payments, impact foreign currency assets, and affect the value of Tunisia's currency. TGTN's Adnan Shuashi filed this report from Tunis.
The minister indicated the deficit can reach 73% in 2030 if the national resources stand still and the demand for energy keeps rising.
This downward trend in activity was reflected in the decline in the number of valid permits, the worsening of the primary energy balance deficit, and the absence of new discoveries for the second consecutive year, compared with 3 technical discoveries made in 2016.
In 2018, the total amount of subsidy to the energy sector reached around $950 million, exceeding the 7% of the state budget, in addition to hydrocarbon imports, which account for 1/3 of the trade deficit.
National oil production, including condensate and LPG, decreased by about 2.4%. This decrease is explained in particular by the natural decline in production in most fields and the cessation of production of certain fields for repair and maintenance work.
The Tunisia Energy Reform Plan project was launched in July 2019, intending to help the country accelerate its energy transition.
Total natural gas consumption increased by 3% in 2018. This increase is explained by the increase in natural gas consumption for both electricity production and end uses.
Authorities and experts conducted a diagnosis of the energy field by identifying weaknesses, opportunities and threats related to the energy sector, as well as public enterprises under supervision. The different departments at the Energy Ministry, as well as the Premier's advisors, aim to develop a thorough vision of the energy sector and its institutions and to propose instructions to improve their activity. Adin Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Kenyan telecom giant Safaricom has set its eye on venturing into Ethiopia's fast-growing mobile market. Ethiopia has announced plans to open its telecoms market to foreign investment for the first time in history. The country said it will be issuing 2 operating permits in April next year. Interested firms have up to November the 22nd this year to submit their bids. Safaricom, like a number of global telecom firms, has expressed interest in the lucrative deal. According to Telco's interim CEO, consultations on the bidding process are already underway. Safaricom is looking to either buy a stake in state-owned Ethio Telecom or setting up shop in the country from scratch. Well, South Africa has signed a tourism partnership with Chinese gaming giant Tencent. The collaboration will span over 2 years. It aims to position South Africa as one of Chinese travelers' preferred tourism destinations through digital marketing campaigns. CGTN Sumitra Naidu has the details.
It's a 2-year deal in which South Africa is hoping to draw thousands of new Chinese tourists to the country.
What would basically happen is that over the next 2 years, the WeChat or Tencent will look into their existing applications and customize them to what the South African tourism or what we're actually asking them to do. And throughout that, they'll be able to customize apps, generate special QR codes, be able to give us algorithms about what the previous visitors did when they're in South Africa. I mean, what did they eat, how much did they spend? So it gives us the soft intelligence to be able to understand.
Almost 100,000 Chinese visited South Africa in 2018. The Department of Tourism is hoping to double that figure in the next 2 years.
I think the partnership is great, and I think that it's long overdue that we partner with such prestigious companies, especially in the Chinese market, where we want to see, large volumes in terms of tourist arrivals in South Africa. We expect that market to grow, by large numbers, between now and 2030. And we hope that, we see a whole lot more Chinese, traveler, visiting our shores and enjoying this beautiful country.
We can leverage this by using the infrastructure of those firms that we have relationships with to advertise South Africa, and also, I think, moreover, to try and get a more flow of economic goods and services going, so that we don't only export ore and coal and stuff to China, and that we don't only import Chinese goods, we also participate in Chinese tourism. We also tour the Chinese mainland, and that strengthens the relationship between the two countries.
In 2014, China was South Africa's 4th largest market for inbound tourism. Today, China tops the list, followed by the US, UK and Germany. South Africa is pushing hard to attract more tourists. The president set a goal to double tourism numbers from 10 million to 21 million in 2030. The Department of Home Affairs has also scrapped requirements for unabridged birth certificates for children living outside of South Africa. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Mario Draghi is counting down to his final days as a president of the European Central Bank. For some, Draghi is Super Mario, the man who saved the single currency during the financial crisis. But for others, his tenure has been less positive, as CGTN's Bruce Harrison reports.
Only high praise here tonight for Mr. Draghi at his farewell ceremony. Speaking first was German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She invoked history and reminded those here of the many remnants you can find of the Romans around Frankfurt, saying that bears witness to the close cultural and intellectual bonds between this place and the eternal city. And she said Mr. Draghi, a Rome native, follows in the excellent tradition of Romans leaving their traces here, obviously referring to his legacy as the ECB chair. French President Emmanuel Macron also speaking. He said the world of banking and finance seems often cold in distance, but Mr. Draghi always knew what was more important beyond words and figures, and that was people's lives, stressing the humanity of Mr. Draghi within this role. We also heard from the former IMF chief, Ms. Christine Lagarde. She's the incoming ECB chair, and she said Mr. Draghi commands attention. He creates silence, but he also caused concerns, but she added rightly so. And she went on to thank Mr. Draghi for what he's done for the euro.
Europe has been at the heart of everything that you do. Your stewardship is now coming to an end, and you leave with the euro more popular than ever and trust in the EU at its highest level since the crisis. Let me thank you for all that you have done in bringing about the continued success of the euro area and, more importantly, the well-being of its people.
And after the latest on Brexit, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to push his plan for an early election through Parliament again. So far, the British government has failed to get the two-thirds majority needed to force an election. From London, here is CGTN's Holly Hudson.
The Prime Minister. Our mission is to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October.
It was a mission that in the end he simply couldn't accomplish. Boris Johnson said he'd rather be dead in a ditch than request a Brexit extension past the 31st of October, but only after Parliament legally forced him to do so, the European Union agreed for a fourth time to delay the deadline by which the UK is set to leave, as negotiators try to avoid yet another stumbling block on the road to Brexit.
This was the week that Boris Johnson pledged the UK would leave the EU. Number 10 blamed Parliament for forcing him to break that promise. Now, MPs have another 3 months from the EU to try and break the impasse. But the public, the Commons and even the parties themselves still seem bitterly divided on exactly how to move forward.
The motion has not obtained the majority required.
On Monday night, Boris Johnson failed for a third time to get enough MPs to back an early general election, after opposition party Labour abstained from the vote.
We look forward to a clear, definitive decision that no deal is absolutely off the table, and there is no danger of this Prime Minister not sticking to his word because he has some form on these matters.
Whether or not Labour are, as the government claimed, too chicken to go to the country, Boris Johnson is determined to find another path to get to the polls before Christmas.
We will not allow this paralysis to continue, and one way or another we must proceed straight to an election. So later on this evening, the government will give notice of presentation for a short bill for an election on the 12th of December, so that we can finally get Brexit Done.
We do know that there is a majority in Parliament for a general election, even if there's not the 2/3 majority that Johnson would need under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So it does seem pretty likely. I think the big question now is whether it would be the 9th of December, which is what the opposition parties want, or the 12th of December, which is the date that the government has said it wants to hold an election on.
On Tuesday, Boris Johnson will try and launch an attempt to force an election in December, the first for almost a century. Even if he gets his way, it's still a huge gamble, as no party is currently in a position to guarantee the results. Holly Hudson, CGTN, London.
Well, we're now going to take a short break and return. More news, including... We take a closer look inside a wildlife jewelry factory in South Africa.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, handmade jewelry takes time and patience, which is why carefully crafted pieces can demand premium prices. The advantage to buyers includes owning original and oftentimes one-of-a-kind pieces. CGTN Sumitra Naidu visited a small local factory in Johannesburg that is creating such wildlife jewelry.
Paul Gibbs and his wife have been making handcrafted jewelry for over 20 years. The pieces are inspired by their love for Africa and its wildlife.
Makulpa was started around about 1996 because we came from the jewellery trade prior to this. My partner and I were both jewellers, and we felt there was a need for products for the tourism market in South Africa. So we investigated getting machinery and how we're going to start this business, which is what we did. And then we started off with the Africa puzzle, which is one of our products, which is still selling today.
The workmanship on this is amazingly detailed. If you look closer, it's actually a puzzle of Africa, and it's made up of 36 pieces, each one representing wildlife from the continent. They're also made up of pendants, so each one can be removed and used individually on a chain.
The pewter pieces are popular with tourists. Big companies that can afford it are now gifting them at workshops and conferences.
Marketing the product was probably the biggest challenge, because we're both creative in making products and putting things together. But it was actually getting into the marketplace was probably the hardest thing to do. So that's why we did trade shows in different countries to try and sell our products over there. We supply a lot of the tourist shops in South Africa, as well as game lodges all over South Africa and Botswana.
Makulpe recently started using recycled glass to create little trinkets for the home. The company also has a standing order that it makes only for the Swazi royal family.
I did a trade show in Birmingham in the UK, and we had a contact there for Swaziland, glass factory in Swaziland that makes recycled glass. So we got together and we developed another range using the recycled glass, which is called green glass, basically.
Pieces range from $20 and are available on order. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Oh, taking a short break. Your sports news after the break, including... The clock is ticking as the Springboks count down preparations to the Rugby World Cup final.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live, your sports news. Well, World Rugby has announced on Tuesday that Cape Town will host a